Hi, my name's Wayne Brooker and welcome to RCC Online. In Australia we have tens of thousands of kilometres of something that we stare at every single day. Yet for all intents and purposes it's invisible to most of us. That's a guardrail. I'm talking about that barrier on the road that stops cars from veering off the road. These guardrails are rarely photoshopped out of any beautiful landscape, and yet for some reason we tend to just ignore that they're actually there. Guardrails, you find them in three main areas. We find them on bridges. I get that, on a bridge with very little margin for area. We also find them on medium strips. You know, that place where there isn't enough room for the traffic island between two lanes of traffic, and without a medium strip, without a medium, it would be so easy for one car to veer off the road and hit the oncoming traffic. Hey, the third area we find guardrails is around curves and on mountains. Now, the other thing about guardrails is they're rarely placed in the most dangerous part of the road. They get placed in areas where it's actually quite safe to drive. You see, the purpose of the guardrail is not to say, don't drive on this part of the road. The purpose of the guardrail is to keep you well away from the point of danger. Guardrails keep us from oncoming traffic. They keep us from mountainsides and things like that. You could say that the guardrail keeps us from moving into an area of potential danger. And yet I've never seen anyone go, I sure do wish they'd take that guardrail down off the Toowoomba Range. If they did that, I could get a much better view of the valley below. And no one does that. We like the idea of having some margin for area. You see, the theory behind the guardrail is that you will do less damage to your car. You'll do much less damage to yourself if you hit the guardrail than if you drive over the side of the mountain or into some oncoming traffic. So for the next couple of weeks and then in the new year, we'll pick this up again and we'll talk about this whole idea of guardrails. It's just we're going to talk not about ones on the road. We're going to talk about relationship guardrails. We're going to talk about moral guardrails. We're going to talk about financial guardrails. And in a very real way, all of these guardrails link into our spiritual life. I want you to think of a moment. What would you say is your greatest regret in life? I don't care if it's a relational regret, a financial regret, a moral regret, parenting regret. My question for you is, do you think it could have been avoided if you had a guardrail up? Now, when I say guardrail, I'm talking about a personal standard of behaviour that you keep well clear of. I'm talking about a personal, this is just for you. This isn't for anyone else. I'm talking about a personal standard of behaviour that you choose as a guardrail for your soul. What I want you to think about is behaviour practices that you're so committed to that if you were to violate them, then you'd feel like you've actually done something wrong. Here's where it gets weird. If someone else were to see that behaviour that's upsetting you, and they see you do it, they might say, hey, just take a chill pill, Wayne. You haven't done anything wrong, and you haven't. But it upsets you because you've just rubbed up against a personal guardrail. And you know there is a danger on the other side of that guardrail. Now, here's the thing in our world. Just about everyone says are bad. You'd be hard-pressed to find anyone that says taking someone's life is acceptable. We all agree that taking someone's life is a bad thing. It's just in our present day, our culture has developed some really weak guardrails. Now, some of those guardrails come in the form of advertising slogans. Let me give you a couple. You've probably heard them before. Drink responsibly, gamble responsibly. Far too many people drink responsible, gamble responsible, think that's a guardrail, but guess what? It's not a guardrail. It's nothing more than a little yellow line painted on the edge of a bridge. Everybody agrees we shouldn't drink irresponsibly. But that isn't much of a guardrail. I'm sure most of you can tell a story about drinking where either you or someone else started drinking and then it went irresponsible. And by the time you got drinking, you didn't even care what was responsible and what wasn't responsible. And that's the nature of alcohol. Now, I'm not saying that drinking responsible is a bad idea. It's just, I'm not saying it's not a guardrail. Here's another one, and it's to parents. We have this problem in our culture of young people feeling pressure to take inappropriate photos of themselves on phones and posting them. And so we have these government-funded campaigns encouraging parents to talk to your kids about this stuff. And they're right. Parents having healthy conversations with their kids, it's a great idea. It's a really good thing. It's just it's not a guardrail. It's just a conversation. And it's nothing more than a yellow painted line on the side of a road. And I've never met a parent that went, you know, I don't really care what happens to my kids. But I've met parents that said, I talked to my kids about drugs and pornography and all sorts of things, and it didn't work. They went down that path anyway. We all know that happily ever after isn't connected with drugs and pornography and any of that type of stuff. It's just our culture still thinks that personal guardrails are legalistic, or they're boring, or they're a complete waste of time. Our world believes that that's what the problem is with religion. It's got all these rules that don't make sense. Now, that religious people are all about these silly rules and silly guardrails, and they're just stupid. That's what they are. They say they're stupid. But these very same people would say, I agree with you that we don't want to find ourselves on the other side of that guardrail. It's just, I don't think I need that guardrail. I think it would restrict me too much. I'm not a bad person. I'll be careful. Only bad people need guardrails, and I'm not a bad person. Now, here's the cool thing. Our God loves us so much that He's invited to talk to Him and relate to Him as a Heavenly Father. And good fathers, we relate to Him as a good father. And if your father wasn't good, you probably wish your father was good. And good fathers say things to their children because they want to keep them out of the danger zone. And they set up guardrails, they set up protective barriers for the kids. And if you and I are going to have conflict in our homes, let's have that conflict on the safe side of the guardrail, because I don't want to have conflict with anyone on the dangerous side, the other side of the guardrail. Some families go so far as to find their guardrails with a written rule, a codex. There's a whole lot of rules. We're not that way oriented in our family. For us, it's more like a culture. It's just I want that guardrail so far away from the edge of the abyss, whether that abyss is a relationship breakdown or a financial breakdown or an addiction, whatever. I want that barrier to be so far away from that if we're going to have a problem, it's going to be an itsy-bitsy wreck that happens on a guardrail, as opposed to go over a cliff from which I may never recover from. And the good news is this: our God loves us so much that He doesn't want us to get hurt, so He provides for us a list of personal standards of behavior that if you adopt as your personal culture, then they'll protect you right throughout your life. For today, let's just say the guardrail is anger. We'll call it anger. And I know before I even get started, some of you are going to kick back and go, there's nothing wrong with getting angry. Jesus got angry plenty of times. In fact, some of the greatest changes that have taken place in our culture have taken place because somebody got angry and they were not prepared to keep on living with the status quo. Slavery was abolished because a man by the name of William Wilberforce got angry, and he just couldn't stand to see that without a law that had allowed a black man to be taken from his homeland and forced to work in a sugar plantation in a foreign land. Fascism came to an end because a man by the name of Winston Churchill got angry at a man named Adolf Hitler. Have you noticed when people get angry, things do tend to get broken? As a teenager, my brother once stormed out of the house. He was so mad, he was so angry, he slammed the door so hard that the glass panel beside our front door just broke into pieces. A long time ago, in a land far, far away, when I was a youth pastor, we had a guy. He fell madly in love with this young girl, as young guys do. In his mind, she was the one. It's just before he had the opportunity to take the relationship to the next level, she dumped him. When he got home that night, he got so mad, he put his right fist through the door of his bedroom he was renting, and he broke his wrist. In the process, it cost him a whole lot of time, it cost him a whole lot of energy, he had to replace the door, and a whole lot of money. Someone throws a punch and a nose gets broken. In anger, one nation lashes out against another, and a pact or a treaty or a trade deal gets broken. Express too much anger when disciplining a child, and trust will get broken. Angry words have a way of breaking hearts. Angry outbursts have a way of killing healthy relationships. Violence is nearly always preceded by anger. Jesus talks about this very issue in the Sermon on the Mount. Let me set the scene for you. Thousands of people have followed Jesus out into the wilderness. Now, wilderness doesn't mean desert. It means they've gone out into a field where there are no toilets, there's no shops, there's no fast food, there's no nothing. Jesus did this because of a crowd of 10 or 15,000 people gathered in Jerusalem. He would have gotten in trouble with the Romans and the Pharisees. So he goes out into the wilderness and thousands of people follow him there. And while they're in the wilderness, Jesus says a whole lot of things that people found highly offensive. Things like, but I warn you, unless your righteousness is better than the righteousness of the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. The thousands of people who were camped out on that hillside couldn't believe what they were hearing. And they couldn't help but think, well, what's the use then? I mean, how could my righteousness ever come close to the Pharisees? In the first century, it was the Pharisees who read, interpreted, and applied to the Word of God, and was done in synagogues and in the temple. They were the religious elite. Just about everyone sitting on that hillside had been reared in a synagogue, had participated in temple worship, and learned the Old Testament law from these very same teachers that were steeped in religion. The role of the everyday layperson was simply to believe and obey what they'd been taught. It must have been so demoralizing to hear Jesus say that if you want to get to heaven, then your righteousness has to exceed that of the righteousness of these holy guys. It's like, I don't know if I can even do that. It's just, if you keep on reading, it becomes apparent that outwardly the Pharisees look perfect. It's just our good appearances don't impress God. God looks at our heart, not at the external. And he looks for hearts that have been changed. It would appear that the Pharisees' heart were hard and callous. And Jesus continues to talk about the kind of heart that he's looking for. I think it's safe to assume that the average Australian considers himself or herself to be basically a good person. As a culture, we're brought into the line of thought that goes, I know I'm not perfect, but I'm not a murderer or anything like that, and I never hurt children. It's if we're drawn on the line in the sand that says, if you murder someone or abuse a child or steal a lot, then you're in the bad category of people, but for the rest of us, we're good people. It's almost like once a person commits a murder, they move from the good side to the bad side, and there's no coming back from the bad side. And that appears to be exactly the thought that was meant to be a good person in Jesus' day. Haven't murdered anyone, that makes me a good person, to which Jesus says, hold your horses there, let's just talk about this. The Pharisees took it upon themselves to define what good behavior was and what bad behavior was. And there are two sources of information they used to separate the good people from the bad people. The first source of information was what we'd call the Torah. We today call the Torah the Old Testament. They also had something else. It was called the oral tradition, which was basically stuff they said, God told this to Moses, it's just Moses never got around to writing it down, and so he just passed it on orally, and it's been passed down orally through the ages. And by the time Jesus comes along, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law regarded the oral law as having equal authority as the written law. Having established that the outside appearance doesn't impress God, Jesus starts out saying, you have heard that our ancestors were told, you must not murder. Jesus is quoting the Torah. In fact, it's commandment number 6 out of 10. The outward act is straightforward, and it's wrong to unjustly take the life of another. Now here's the oral part of the law, the man-made part, I would say. If you commit murder, you are subject to judgment. More likely than not a single person sitting on that hill had ever been brought before the village court to stand trial for murder. So they're probably feeling pretty good about themselves and going, so here is what Jesus says, and it's kind of like the guardrail Jesus wants to talk to us about. He says, but I say, if you're even angry with someone, you are subject to judgment. I don't know if you see this or not, but Jesus has moved the focus of attention from the outward act that none of them had committed to an inner attitude that we all experience. Jesus is addressing the inner attitudes and emotions and thoughts that lead people to commit murder. Jesus is saying, if you get angry with someone, in the eyes of the city magistrates, you might be innocent, but in God's court, you're guilty. In fact, Jesus kind of outlines 3 stages of anger. In the first stage, he says, anger is directed towards another person. Jesus says, every time you get angry with someone, you're opening yourself up for judgment. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think someone who loses their block and throws a temper tantrum or lets off a few foul words should be held to the same account as a murderer. So what's going on here? Most of the time, anger isn't planned. It's more like we didn't get our own way, so we respond with an angry outburst. And as we said before, not all anger is bad. Jesus got angry with the Pharisees when they put obstacles in the way of people who were trying to come to God in his temple and seek his face. Just have you noticed how quickly our anger turns into something more evil? Someone stops us from getting what us want, and all of a sudden, this ugly desire rises up within us to get even or hurt them some way. Jesus says we shouldn't allow ourselves to become angry enough to consider harming someone, because when you do, you've already committed murder in your heart. The second stage of anger I would call contempt. Jesus said, but I say, if you're even angry with someone, you are subject to judgment. If you call someone an idiot. Jesus used the word raka, not idiot. No, we don't use that word anymore, but don't worry, we've come up with heaps of ways to replace it, heaps of words to replace it. Raka is an expression of contempt. Literally, it means empty head. The word may have originated from the sound of a person clearing their throat in preparation to speak. That's what I think of you. Jesus said it's a greater evil than just anger. In anger, we want to hurt someone. In contempt, we don't even care if they get hurt. Instead of raka, we might use a sexual or racial or a cultural slur to put them down. Whether it's a four-letter word or not, the intent is always the same. It means to cast them aside, like spitting them out of my mouth. I don't care about you at all. You don't belong here. Words like that can leave a permanent scar, to which Jesus said, if you call someone an idiot, you're in danger of being brought before the courts. Jesus said that people who express contempt are guilty enough to be judged to the highest court of the land. The third stage of anger is malice. It goes on, and if you curse someone, you're in danger of the fires of hell. Ever had someone cut you off in traffic? You call them a brainless idiot. Even with those words, we're already gone way too far. Jesus is saying the moment you allow attitudes or thoughts of anger or contempt and malice to enter your life, you've hit a guardrail. It's time to pull away, because if you don't, it won't take that long before you find yourself out of harmony with God's kingdom, out of harmony for God's plan and purpose for your life. Now I want you to hear me on this. You're not going to go to hell for calling someone an idiot. Jesus is illustrating the fact that the kingdom heart is a heart of love. The heart that values relationships and doesn't just want to get by with the rules and say, well, at least I've never killed anyone. The kind of heart that values other people. Now remember, Jesus already knows what kind of death awaited him on the cross. He knew all of that. So reading between the lines, we can hear him say, hey, you people who cut people down with your words, I'm here to give my life for you. That guy that just called you an idiot, for me, he's so valuable that even if he was the only person in the world, I still would have died for him. And you're making him sound worthless and insignificant? What's that say about my mission to die for him? How dare you do that? That's not the kind of heart inside a person who is truly good. That's not the kind of heart inside of the person who follows me. Every year, every Jew would travel to Jerusalem and present an offering at the temple. It was the way of getting right with God. This was a really big deal. It was considered the pinnacle of worship to God. Jesus said, so if you're presenting a sacrifice at the altar on the temple, and you suddenly remember that someone has something against you, leave your sacrifice there at the altar, go and be reconciled to that person, then come offer your sacrifice to God. Imagine you're there. You've walked for a day and a half in the hot sun to make this sacrifice. And while you're in the line, your mind's just wandering, as they do when we have free time. And your mind wanders back to this hillside when you heard Jesus speak. And these words start to rebound in your mind. If you want to eliminate anger, take action immediately. Right then you remember, someone is angry with me. And I'm at odds with someone. My actions have knowingly hurt someone. Jesus says it's far more important to be reconciled with that someone than to engage in religious activity. Worship becomes a sham. If we behave so poorly prior to coming to worship that we've knowingly hurt someone. John, the youngest of Jesus' disciples, he made a very similar point when he said, if someone says, I love God, but hates a fellow believer, that person's a liar. For if we don't love people that we can see, how can we love God whom we cannot see? And he has given us this command, that those who love God must love their fellow believers. Well, you're on the hillside. Thousands of people, and Jesus is finishing his talk about his guardrail called anger by saying, when you're on the way to court with your adversary, settle the differences quickly. Otherwise, your accuser may hand you over to the judge, who will hand you over to the officer, and you'll be thrown in prison. And if that happens, you surely won't be free again until you've paid the last penny. The prison that Jesus was referring to was a debtor's prison. The bankruptcy laws they had back then were very different to ours. If you couldn't repay a debt, you could be thrown into debtor's prison, and there you would stay until someone else came and paid your debt. And the reason you'd have to wait for someone to pay your debt is it's hard to earn money and pay off a debt when you're locked up in prison. Jesus says this is urgent business. Settle matters wherever you can outside of court. It's also safer. Anger can turn you into a hypocrite. Anger can land you into jail. So settle matters quickly. Jesus says, do it now. If you wait, it could turn out to be disastrous. But what if the person refuses to be reconciled? A problem is only a problem if you can do something about it, otherwise it's a fact of life. So don't think for a moment that if you tried to make peace with someone and that someone refuses, that you're not allowed back to church ever again. That's not what he's talking about at all. As I close, let me give you some takeaway thoughts about guardrail, the guardrail called anger. You see, relational anger, relationship breakdown, they happen everywhere. They happen in families, they happen in politics, they happen in workplaces, they even happen in churches. You see, the secret to a great marriage is to be a great forgiver. So let me ask you these questions as I close. Does your heart long for reconciliation? Because if you don't, then you're banging against a guardrail. It's called anger. And there's danger just the other side of that guardrail, so pull away. Here's my second question for you, second takeaway thought. Have you done all you can to create relational harmony with people in your life? I mean, have you honestly done everything you can? And I understand that some people, it's not safe to try to seek reconciliation, but if it is safe, have you done everything you can? The third takeaway thought. Do you act lovingly towards that person? I mean, sometimes people hurt us, but is that going to influence the way you act towards them? Are you still loving towards that person? Question number 4. Does it bother you that this other person's anger is not only hurting them, it's hurting other people? Does it bother you? Because by following Christ, when we see these relationship breakdowns, it should bother us. You say, now, if you can answer yes to these 4 questions, then you've got the kind of heart that Jesus wants, and can I tell you, you've got a really healthy guardrail in your life. But if you couldn't answer yes to all those questions, this week, your homework is, what type of a guardrail do you think I should put up with this issue of anger? Hey, God bless. Looking forward to seeing you so much. And remember, our church is back open on a Sunday morning. Make it a habit to be there at least once a month. God bless.
Thank you for joining us online at Runcorn Christian Church. We're continuing to grow our online presence, so please check in frequently on our website and social media platforms to stay up to date with the latest services that we have available. Make sure you subscribe to this channel so you don't miss a single video. To support the ongoing work of Runcorn Christian Church and partner in our vision, we'd like to invite you to give electronically. You can make a direct debit transfer using the account details that are on the screen and also on our webpage. Thank you again for joining us today, and God bless.